Hidde, hey,
Hey, so good to see you.
it's good to see you too. Let's get right into it. What has you waking up excited these days?
A lot of things, but I think for me, I will maybe get back to this later in the show because I know you are excited about this. But it has actually been music going back into like making sure I listen to all the music that I should listen to, making lists and like figuring out, oh, that person is related to that, and like I've been spending a lot of time going to gigs, figuring out which albums to listen to, and like all that kind of stuff. Like in this age of like where we're trying to automate everything, like finding out all these cool things that have been made and are still being made as well and being released. To keep tabs on the music has been keeping me busy, I think. Yeah.
That's amazing. What have you been your go-to tools and vehicles for being exposed to music, but also like what are you using to make those lists and kind of sift through them and but also like what led you to that place where that's been where your attention's been going?
Yeah, I've been using various tools. Like there's websites that list gigs. So when I travel for work regularly. So I try and find out like what's playing in that area. There's a lot of websites that do this, like Songcake and like
Yeah.
others. They're not always good, so I always try and find out like what are local venues and then look at their websites or frankly like their Instagram because often they don't update their websites. And like yeah, I try and use that to find out about sort of live music. And for listening to music, I started moving away from streaming, as many kind of nerdy people have been doing, I think. And I actually talked to people who are like, "Oh, I've been doing this forever, like it's been a thing." But I've started collecting music files instead of streaming to make sure that I can listen to it offline and like just have my
Yeah.
own collection.
We should get into that, but let's stick with the live music for first because when did you start going to shows just as a byproduct of your work travel? You're already in a place for a thing and you're like, I'm gonna go do a gig. Like when did that come to be?
It's been recent, actually, like the last couple of years. I was chatting to my friend Dave, who is organizing State of the Browser, a really cool event in London. And he was telling me this, like, I travel for music, not just when he travels for work, but he will go to a different city, enjoy music. And in Europe, like, you can take a train from London to Paris in like a couple of hours, and it is no problem. Most people wouldn't do it. They wouldn't even leave their own city for music, but it actually makes a lot of sense to do that because music is great. And like, you'll have fun in the process because you'll end up in sort of like meet weird people or
Yeah.
it has all sorts of
Yeah.
benefits. Just be like, yeah, that person was playing there. I live far
Yeah.
away. I'm still gonna try and make my way down.
Yeah.
So he kind of
Yeah.
got me into this, and he still does because he'll message me and be like, "This thing is playing in Brussels, which is like an hour away. I'll go. Yeah, if he calls, I'll go."
Dave is a gem of a human being, that's for sure. I will be talking to him at some point as well on the show. But so it's like there's friendly encouragement, but then there's also this kind of deeper thing that I think you beautifully articulated is that it comes in the form of, for me at least, I will need to if a show is coming to the States. I will often need to venture out because Pittsburgh tends to get hopped over en route to from somewhere between New York and Chicago is a tour stop usually in like Philly, but then they'll often like sort of stop in Ohio or something. And so if we get the kind of scraps sometimes, which is a little sad, but traveling for music specifically does, you're like, oh, suddenly I'm in a different city and we need to eat and we need to get dressed up. But the process of getting there or like in that moment, I'm not thinking that it's often like the chore and I'm like looking at like a calendar date and I'm just like struggling with the logistics of it. But then whenever we actually do it, it's like, oh man, this is lovely. This is great. We should do this all the time.
And even the chore, I feel like it's more fun than like, oh, next week I have to do the dishes. Like, I will not look forward to that. Like, if
Yeah.
there's, oh, I'm going to Brussels to see, like I did a few weeks ago, went to see Massive Attack with Dave, actually. They were in Brussels. And it's a lot of fun working up to the moment and being like, oh, yeah, we should try and find some place to eat. It makes the whole kind of music experience worth it, too, because it's like you're making an effort to see this thing because it is a special thing. I wouldn't be making that effort for doing mundane things, but like listening to music. Yeah, awesome.
Yeah. And then there is the experience itself, which there's recorded music, which has been shrunken down, commoditized, put into this endless stream. But then there's still the experience of being present in a room full of a certain kind of energy and other people and having that shared experience, and that one will never be, commoditized, or a lot of shit around it will be, but like that experience remains, I think, one of like the purest forms of life experience, where you just know it to be good. You know that it's like, this is special, this is good, this is real. Yeah.
We do get a lot of bullshit in our daily work, and this is very pure. I can't imagine like the musicians to have like a scrum meeting where they're like doing all this kind of these things that we do, and they are helpful and they make sense for our work and stuff. But like, they're really into it. So I appreciate artists a lot.
Yeah. That's my hope through a lot of this technological shift, is that we will returning to value the artists and the people who are able to make experiences happen and to elevate people and deliver those kind of pure, real thing. I think that everything else will become this kind of very amorphous stew with a lot of slop and bullshit, and the rest of it just kind of like infiltrating and making it very difficult to separate the signal and the noise. And it's like, going to a live concert is all signal.
Yeah, and the artist is going to stand out a lot more, right? It is actual signal. Yeah, for sure.
And that kind of brings into the physical format that you're kind of talking about, is kind of like migrating maybe away from the streaming platforms and into more like kind of, here are these files, and it sounds like you kind of appreciate them or cherish them or think of them or hold them in a different regard than, I could just like search for this song and have it come up. There's that's like a scarcity almost, or a weight to it.
Yeah, you carefully make sure you get this album and not that album, or like you listen to the whole thing. It makes it kind of more. And I started collecting vinyl like everyone does at a certain age. It's like, vinyl is amazing. I mean, I'm not old enough to have a childhood growing up with vinyl. I think my dad probably had some, but I don't think he ever, like, he would have CDs. But yeah, it's fun, but then it is not convenient. Like, I can't take vinyl on the way with me.
Yeah.
So yeah, digital files I've been enjoying a lot. Yeah.
That's great. Yeah, and in a lot of ways, and especially where we're sourcing those, or it's like, like Bandcamp and the things and the rest of the apparatus to kind of support artists more directly still exists. And I was thinking of this thing. I tried to vibe code a thing that was, if you're listening to an artist just throughout your week, at the end of the week, you get a report. And if you liked a song by an artist, if you were playing something on heavier rotation, or you like a song and, actually you had already liked a prior song by the same artist, that it surfaces their website or their Bandcamp link or their whatever, and are like these like off ramps to it. So it's like, the convenience of streaming, but knowing that these are, fractions of a penny making their way back to the artist to try to like just make it easier. Because I think that the will is there. Like, a lot of people want to support the artist more directly, but it's that friction of, okay, well, I got to like go Google them, I got to do whatever. So it's like, what's the automatic way of?
If you've seen the queues at the merch stands at concerts, like, people want to like buy the merch and like spend money on their artists.
Yeah.
Ticket sales are going real quick as well. Sometimes, like, you need to be there in the first second to get a ticket to some gig and stuff. People want to pay money to their artists, and they want to support for sure.
and with respect to the digital stuff, it just feels like there has been just this just a fast current kind of away from all of that. It really took it took a serious toll where all of a sudden those t-shirt sales and those queues really become, it's like that's where the food money is coming from, which didn't always used to be the case. So I do think that there is something to, it's like reintroducing digital scarcity, and then making it easy to cultivate that and to make that happen. It's like, I don't know, that feels like a fun design challenge.
Right. Yeah. And we need it for websites too. Like how discover indie websites, spend more time on them and make them worthwhile.
How do you discover indie websites and make them worthwhile? That's a great question.
I just go on the indie web and then I see all these wonderful, I mean, I don't know, I sometimes look for them. I think they're easy to find if you know what you're looking for. And often you don't find an indie website when you're looking for one, right? A lot of artists don't have their own websites, or like restaurants or stuff. They'll be on social media instead. But yeah, I guess like I just read vlogs and stuff, so I just see links to people's websites or like follow them on social media, and I'm like, oh, nice, they've got a website and it's cool. They've got fonts that I like, or like colors, or this is still very much alive, enjoying building their own websites. So that's cool. Yeah, I think it's great. It is a little hard to discover at times, especially with search engines kind of becoming less useful at this, or trying to keep the traffic within like I know a lot of search engines have become chatbots, and just say this chatbot will give you the answer. But I'll still go to manual websites and enjoy what they look like.
There's still the beauty of the hyperlink, and that once you're kind of on somebody's website that is linking out to another person's website or whatever, it's like that's in my view, another pure experience where it's like, here's somebody taking the effort. Like I think about that because it's like you can just make a passing reference to something all the time. I think that there's this effort that goes into creating a hyperlink that again, just Web 1.0, just part of the fabric of it, but that continues to be this, I think, very, very special thing. That's a decision. It's effort. It's there's something going into that enriches not just the body of the thing that you're reading, but that discoverability, that adjacent idea or thought or other person's thing is still just, it's such a beautiful technology all these years.
It is. It still works, which is surprising. Like, I don't know of many inventions that are, when they are technology, that actually stay around for that long. And still work in the same way and have the same kind of benefits too. I think that's pretty cool. And I actually wish that maybe my wish for the web is like that more people would know how to build something on it. Because it is fairly simple technology, but although you need to be someone involved or a bit of a nerd to actually write HTML. But it was always meant to be like, oh, anyone on the street, you could stop them and say, here's some HTML, like write some HTML. Like it's not complicated, but you do need to know a lot of things to actually ship a website. I think we could still make that a lot easier. What do you think?
This is something you're perfectly equipped to speak to this, because I see there's the indie web movement that I have been around, but not directly involved in, largely because despite me doing this stuff professionally, I would be like, oh, okay, like, let me get web mentions hooked up, or like just like some other stuff. Like, in certain respects, I have the core ingredients in place and have for a while. But then there's been like the other stuff that is just like, this is really, really cool. But it's always kind of felt a little bit like, here's your computer kit and go build your computer, your Linux powered computer. And I'm like, back to what you were just alluding to, where there's all of these artists and there's all of these people and there's all of these, people doing amazing things in the world that have defaulted in the local music venues and the rest of it, have defaulted to social media just because it's like, okay, they made it easy despite, the fact that they don't own this stuff, they're not in control, they're not in the driver's seat or whatever, but it's fast and frictionless. And so I'm wondering about this new age where that HTML know-how, that CSS know-how, that level of plumbing isn't so much of a barrier to people who ought to have websites and value them and have them. I'm curious to get your thoughts on that, because this gets into that. What I see is AI making this stuff that we value more accessible to more people. This is one of the hard tensions that there's one of the biggest reasons why I wanted to talk to you is I think that you've been very clear-headed at being able to sort of speak to a lot of the downsides as well as the opportunities of this technology. But when we're talking about, here's a bunch of great people, local music venues, independent artists, all of these things, people that should have websites, people who are out there making good stuff to go out in the world. And here is this amazing technology called the World Wide Web that's still working. Hold down the fort. Amazing. And we want to continue to value it. We don't want to be like, yeah, like remember that. And so that needs to stay alive. These new dynamics that are kind of sucking the air less towards the World Wide Web and more towards just, it's almost kind of inwards, or it's sucking things towards platforms or centralization or of some way, shape, or form. But it doesn't feel, it's like, yes, these are like the boon years for the World Wide Web, or maybe, I don't know, maybe I'm just not in the right places.
Yeah, well, seeing the web kind of go to like people who deserve to have websites, like restaurants or artists or whatever, seeing them go to some place like Instagram where you can't even make a hyperlink. Like they have this thing where they're like, yeah, you go to my link in VO and then you go to the VO and then there's like some links or like services that provide lists of links, and it's all kind of awkward if you think about it. But everyone is like, sure, that this is now our reality. I think that was a step away from the web that we had that isn't great, but the step that kind of is happening now is probably even worse when it goes into the big chatbot machine where you're just kind of inside a chatbot and get information in ways that isn't actually your own words. It's like reused and scrambled and mixed and changed, and it may not credit you. Like that is a big worry to me, like that people don't even have any control over how their information is presented. The flip side of it, like using this technology for people to actually make their own websites, like you were alluding to, I think that's pretty cool. Like if you don't know how HTML, CSS works, then you can give some prompts and describe kind of what you want. You want that link to be yellow, or you want that thing to be at the top or at the bottom or whatever. I think that kind of thing gives me more hope. Like if people can be creative without knowing the exact technological side of things, I think that is quite exciting. It is somewhat worrying to me as an accessibility expert, seeing that, because I know what could go wrong. I also know what could go good or well, so we need to make sure it happens in a good way or have the right sort of checks and balances. But I'm also seeing it on a lower level where it's like, if you don't know how this API works or how to install the CMS, the fact that you can ask a very unclear question and get a very clear answer back, where it goes like, you need to be here in the docs. I think that is something that some of these AI tools offer that also makes web development a lot easier. Where like before you maybe have to go on a forum or write a blog post and then wait many hours or years to get an answer, you can now kind of get pointed in the right direction. I don't see answers to be correct all the time, but I see pointing in the right direction as something that's helpful in itself. And like the documentation use case is pretty phenomenal. And yeah, I think that could help people who want to make their own website. It's still also a problem of like, okay, you have a website, you need to host it somewhere, and you need a domain name, and that needs to be paid monthly or whatever. Like these kinds of structures are just hard. for people to understand, especially if it would be something like a social media platform where nobody ever asks you for your credit card. They just want all of your data and your whole life. You don't need a contract or something in place. And I think that's something that's really hard to make easier. Maybe governments should hand out domain names when you're born. Like, here's your passport, here's a domain name, that's your FTP credentials, and here you go. And make that a whole lot easier because it could be public infrastructure. Imagine what would happen if everyone had websites.
That would be pretty wild. I'm sure that's been discussed at least somewhere, or at least at like a national level, probably.
I should say I work for the government. This is not an official government announcement.
This is you saying we should do this. Oh my God. Yeah. But I do think that you're right, is that there's this kind of like last mile thing. I actually just went through this process with so my wife works at like a private counseling firm doing sort of therapy and arts therapy, and kind of working on updating their website from an old Wix powered website, which again, no shade on them, but is just like, she is a small business owner trying to run a therapy practice, do good by the community. And it was just like very prohibitive for her. And it's like her results, because she wasn't, she isn't a professional designer, developer, anything like that. So through a few sessions that included us kind of collaborating and running quite a bit of that through LLMs to help with this process and to kind of like distill her values and her goals and like how she wants to be accessible and inclusive, and like all of like these are critical for us. This is, woven into my DNA. I need to make sure that these things go. To see that kind of translated into an experience was really, really cool. She was like, whoa, that's really neat. And then we kind of got to the end where it's that, okay, cool, now it's time to deploy this thing. I see that as, a huge opportunity to make that stuff just be, here's the domain I want. Here's the service. Just make me a website. I don't even really like care I don't care what CMS it is. I don't care whatever is, but I do need it to live at a domain, and I do need it to like be live. And if I say I want changes to that website, I want those changes to make their way out into the world. It does feel like there's like that could evolve as well to become more accessible to folks.
Yeah, there's a lot of plumbing that could be taken away or like abstracted away, I guess. Like, people want to pick their own domain name. They probably don't want to set up DNS or other things.
Oh, yeah.
Because, it's hard. But that's the same thing with, like, in your house, you may have an electrician to help you with certain parts of your electricity.
Yep.
I don't know about you. I definitely do. Like, I don't know much to do with my hands. Like, usually I need to hire someone to help me out doing stuff in the house. Which I'm a bit embarrassed about, but also like there's so much stuff that they know. Like, if you drill here, it could explode or whatever. I want to make sure a professional looks at that. But somehow for the web, I feel like we should make it possible for that to work, even without professional intervention. Maybe it's a pipe dream, but it would be cool because we would get a web that has more interesting content.
And this kind of speaks to things like web standards, where it's just like, you have a bunch of people interfacing, creating web code. They would say, I care about accessibility. They would say, I care about, this stuff. If you were to say, here's what that means, and 100% of people would be like, oh yeah, of course. Yeah. Like that's table stakes. That's a given. And better than nearly everyone that that's a lot easier said than done. But this gets to the point of kind of like smart defaults, and this gets to the land of design systems, and this gets to the land of, well, how do you just make the easy and default thing the right thing, the accessible thing, the thing that's built using the sturdy foundations, so that anyone can pick those things up and assemble them and have a much better chance. It's not going to get to 100%, but it's at least not going to be totally butchered. And I think that matters a lot more than it did whenever we kind of first started talking about this idea of like a global design system, or sort of something that's just like having something that's like less a de facto standard that everyone has to go through this gory process to ultimately arrive at the exact same place. It's like, man, just like,
Yeah.
can't we just park that stuff in like the right place, hit it hard, hold it up and say, here's the defaults that we use for just your basic form fields for your basic, like your basic common stuff. Like, and then of course, yeah, train and retrain these LLMs to be sort of scooping that stuff up and wielding it by default rather than whatever the hell it's doing now.
Yeah, enough that we got to a bunch of that with OpenUI. Like, there's an example where there are a couple like the customizable select kind of things. It's great that these will now have accessible defaults. Like, I think the trick in it is that people need to understand that you won't get all of your accessibility free. You will only get the specific bits that the browser can know what to do with at build time or whatever. And then there's still stuff that you'll need to do as, someone developing websites. But just to take away, like, at least the bits that the browser could easily do itself, I think it's a huge opportunity. And I hope we'll be able to add more things, but it's great to have it in places like Popover and Dialogue, where it's just like, making a dialogue that works is easier now. Still not extremely easy because we need anchor positioning and we need all of this to work actually well. Yesterday I was building a Popover prototype for WCAG. We're working on WCAG 3. And I thought one UI pattern there could be to do a little Popover to hide some complexity. That is actually hard. And I worked on Popover. But to actually get it to work on all the browsers and do like the positioning without messing around with libraries, it's still not entirely there. We're almost there, but there's like a little bit of last miles that need to happen.
And that's just, I can't thank you and the rest of the people who do that work. Like, I think that I've always kind of from afar appreciated y'all's work because it's like, it's operating at a much deeper, like it's not just just ship it, like we'll figure it out later. There's just like so much more that goes into it, and that it is an iterative process, and there's so much coordination. There's so much like that needs to happen to get these things that at the end of the day feel like it's not like you're going to get on like a giant conference stage with like, fireworks. It's all this just kind of just that hard-earned infrastructure that just kind of shows up, and that's just been
and then when installed, there's still parts that aren't perfect and stuff because of all the steps that led to there, like Popover being an element first and then becoming an attribute, like just learning along the way what would work the best and what would be the right approach. It's been a long process, but also really fun to see it happen. And I think we were really lucky with a very smart group of people that were also partly working on the browser so they could actually implement it there and see what would happen. And a lot of stuff happens. This won't work, or this needs some extra accessibility bits or whatever. You learn while you do, and you need to get it right because it will ship everywhere, and it's really hard to unship web platform features. Like, they will be there forever.
With the hyperlink, fast forward a few decades, and it's still doing its thing. Like all of these things, they're designed to last. There's this spirit and attitude around kind of like long-term planning, long-term thinking, and that just flies in the face of, I feel like, what we're all experiencing right now, which is just this frenetic hype cycle that has just kind of pulled us, into this very fast-moving current. And I curious to get your take as someone who operates along, as a practitioner doing work, and applying what you're building at the basement at the slowest moving kind of pace layer standards level all the way up through, and then kind of seeing the fastest pace layers starting to like kind of play. How are you kind of navigating this moment and that kind of tension between all of just what feels like a very real juxtaposition of pace layers?
It's really hard, but while you're in the moment, it's easier to keep that slow pace because what you're doing is at the slow pace. Like working in web standards is always a slow pace because there are so many different actors that are involved with it. Like the World Wide Web Consortium has got, I think, 300 members or something like that. And they all have different opinions and different ways of looking at what they're doing. Like we've got civil society organizations and we've got browser makers and we've got car makers and like all these different people that are working with web technology that are trying to build AI into the web, but also UI and like there are a lot of different people doing different things. But to try and get agreement with a lot of different people and make it really good, that has to be a slow pace. At the same
Yeah.
time, like that fast-paced world is also happening, and we're witnessing it. And I think it's sometimes great to be at the slower pace because you also don't have to jump into every single bit of hype. Like that's
Yep.
something that helped me in my like web career. Is like I'm usually quite late on the train. Like when React came out, it took me many years to start using it for the first time. And I don't really regret that because it means that I didn't have to use a lot of different versions and a lot of changes and a lot of drama. I could just use it when it was at a stable kind of state.
Yeah.
If it was ever there, like there's a, it's easier to kind of jump on late. When the AI is done, when we have AGI, I will
Yeah.
jump on that train or
Yeah.
whatever. I'm comfortable being late because I know that when it's later, it's probably also going to be more mature. And there's a lot of benefit to kind of being on that slower uh, pace too. I have
I think
larger impact, I guess.
yeah. I think people really need to hear that. I think like what would you say to somebody, and sort of specifically thinking of, the person who's gotten started, let's say, in the field within the last 5 years, let's say, so somebody that's like still early, still trying to like find their like footing. I think that so many people are just frantically treading water, trying to keep their head above water, that it's like difficult to even think about going like, do you even need to be in this water in the first place, or could you be like watching from the safety of the banks?
So much depends on where you work as well. Like a large part of our industry is like moving towards you must use AI or you must do this or follow the hype, and people are afraid to be. I quite recently joined the government, like 1.5 years ago or something, and one thing that's great about that is that the incentive is really around citizens. Like we need to make things that are good for citizens, and maybe the parliament will get questions, and then we might need to respond to that. But like the general kind of gist of it is you can do things that make sense for the world. Whereas if you work in a business, you have to be much more focused on shareholder value in the end, because even if it doesn't have shareholders, like the profit has to be made. And it is a lot harder. If you're starting out, I have had conversations with people who recently start out, and I think it is a lot harder. I always think back about when I started out, and in a sense, like it was just a lot more welcoming. Like people were trying to help each other. You could view a source and see like what people were doing, and like the pace was a lot slower as well.
Yeah.
So I try and empathize with people who are new. And I also realized that when I started out, I had it a lot easier. So I don't really know how to package that in kind of a helpful thing to people who are new. I do try and encourage them to sort of stay calm and try and sort of not always jump on every hype if you don't have to. But it really depends, and I recognize that in a lot of companies that's not a choice that you have. I know that people are being counted by the token these days. Like you come to your yearly review and it's like, how many tokens have you used? It's sad, I think, and maybe it doesn't make sense. Like
so sad.
But if you're in that company, I don't blame you for trying to, I guess, use token. Yeah.
But that's just it. It's like, everyone will, we have no choice but to operate within the systems at a government level, at a company level, at a society level. It's like the way that these systems are in place, what's incentivized, what's rewarded, what's penalized, like influences human behavior at the end of the day. And when you have this just like fast frenetic thing that's just been, injected into the bloodstream of every aspect of society, and everybody is just getting, I just feel this vibrating, like anxious, fast moving energy, just kind of like infiltrating every nook and cranny across the board, seemingly, that it feels very hard to paint a different picture. And I think that it is important to say that. I always think back to like, there's always you going back to your React experience. I think that like that was kind of almost like the training ground for this latest shift. Is like React is certainly like captured a lot of the attention, and like it was well talked about, it was like hyped about, it was everybody kind of out there, pontificating about it. But then it's like when you like zoomed out and you looked at like the market share of what technologies are actually powering the web, and you're like, oh, this is like actually pretty small. And it's just like, it just happens to be this very visible, very new, exciting. And again, like, and it's not a knock on it. It was just, it was a phenomenon, right? Like in a lot of ways. And so we kind of had to discern wherever you were on that sort of hype cycle, that it's just like, do I want to take this bait, but just to just even be reminded that it's like, oh yeah, like the majority of the web is not this. And so maybe this isn't so do or die for me. And same way that all of the stuff that existed before AI hit the scene, all of the technologies, all of the applications of those technologies, all of just the opportunities, the constraints, all of that stuff is still there. And then this is just yet another thing. It is part of the equation now, but it's not necessarily like the entire equation. And it's very difficult.
I think that's an important thing to encourage folks as well, that you don't always have to do this unless like forced by your management or whatever, I understand. But in a lot of cases, it can just make sense to not do the hype thing. I'm doing a talk on AI and sustainability tomorrow, where I do 5 tips related to AI and sustainability. And I have like a 6th bonus tip, which is don't use it for the thing. Like, it is okay. And I want to remind people, like, it is okay to have a use case where you actually like, okay, this is going to be an Excel sheet, or it's going to be a couple of lines of Python. It doesn't have to be hooked up to an LLM or like something like that. And we are sometimes made to feel like that, like we must include the latest tech or we're going to fall behind. I'm always afraid of falling behind. Like when my kids come home with some funny new word that I never heard, and then it's like, oh, I'm not cool anymore, right? But we can't run a business like that, right? We can't just sort of base ourselves on like, oh, I'm afraid to fall behind. I don't know. Like, you need to be creative in yourself as well, and sort of, I mean, the artists, we started talking about musicians at the start, like they're not afraid they will fall behind. I don't think. They come out with cool new albums that are completely different than the stuff before. And I think, I hope that we, like, in the industry also continue to realize that, like, we don't have to always do the latest and greatest, because the latest and greatest might be the thing that nobody's talking about. And the majority may not be actually doing the cutting edge stuff, like with React. Like, it was a small part, but talked about very loudly. And a lot of people are just kind of continuing onwards with a website that was much simpler.
It's interesting that the web has been around long enough for us to have at least some historical precedent now. And you have this idea of like the arc of here's server rendered web pages. And then it's just like in React's heyday, it was like, here's like a blank body document. We're just going to write the entire web page using JavaScript. And then it took the better part of a decade to go back around, and then, not going, whoops, like we made a mistake, but here's this like hot new thing called
a lot of the times, like in the history, that hasn't actually turned out to be the perfect solution. Like, the perfect thing doesn't exist, and we'll continue to circle around. So often it makes sense to just chill and
Yeah.
do it carefully. Yeah.
Yeah.
Some of the best websites around are like built 15 years ago and then are still kind of going strong. We met at
Yeah.
CSS Day last year, I think, and their website has continued to be the same for however many years they're doing it now. And it's fast, it works, it's good. So yeah, in many of the cases, like it actually works to keep things simple.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and that CSS Day talk was, you mentioned it earlier that you're talking about it tomorrow, and this is one of the biggest topics, maybe the thing that had me finally reach out to you, as I was like, I really am craving and need to get some great perspective on this moment and sustainability, to put a finer point on it, because I think that what I tend to see is, like a lot of things, is that things just kind of end up stratifying into the hard edges of the spectrum. And I think that there's a lot of nuance. There's a lot of like, here's like the real reality of AI's impact on the environment, but then the things that we can and should be doing as, again, more people are just have that as we've been sort of alluding to, this pressure to use it at all costs. So really, your talk was so great and level-headed and showed some real like practical things that we can do as practitioners, and that it's, again, kind of avoiding that like all or nothing, like just don't use it. But like you're alluding to earlier, it's like, yeah, not everything needs to be run through this. Like, this is yet another tool in the toolkit, and you don't have to reach for it for any and all things. Yeah, would be really curious to get your take on, like, from the time you gave that talk to the talk you're giving tomorrow, like what's changed, where's your head at?
Well, that one, so at CSS I talked about making the web more sustainable. My talk tomorrow is AI and sustainability, so it's a bit more focused on AI. But a lot has changed as well. And I've started to realize more and more that the impact on AI is so much bigger. Like, it isn't like 1 or 2% bigger, but it's like many times bigger, magnitudes more. And that is fascinating to me. And also, if you look at the numbers, like, they are expecting 20 to 30% increase of energy use every year because of generative AI. That's scary because we need that number to go down, and we agreed in Paris to have that number go down. And scientists are pretty clear on like the number going down, even like a little bit, is going to matter. Every bit is going to matter. And if it goes up, it's also going to matter. It's going to get hotter, and like we'll get more disasters. Which makes it something that is really worth focusing on.
Yes.
And then more trying to find solutions for. And there are actually a lot of like practical solutions too, like where using generative AI, you can use smaller models. You can use more specific models. Like, if you're doing a model that's around doing taxes, it doesn't need to know what the capital of France is. For instance, like, there's so much knowledge in these, like, we stuck the whole world's knowledge into a model. It probably doesn't need to know most of the things that are in there. A bit like Tailwind, for instance, like it has classes for everything you could possibly do on a website. But if you're not doing most of these things, well, I used to say this about Bootstrap, I guess, like, you just get a lot of things that you don't need. But with AI, like, that is a lot bigger. So there's a lot of optimizations people can do. Like, they can use smaller models, they can use more focused models, and that is going to help. Also, distinguishing in different kinds of AI is helpful. Generative AI is a lot bigger, magnitudes bigger in terms of CO2 emissions than what they call traditional AI. Like, if you're in Apple Maps and you're trying to find out how to get home, that is using AI, but it's not generative AI. It's like wayfinding type of AI. When I studied AI in university like 15 years ago, one of my first assignments was do the quickest route between A and B. And it was the kind of thing that we had to work on then. And that is definitely AI, but it's a different type. And it also uses a lot less energy than the generating stuff. Generating can be like using a helicopter to go to work. It's kind of using way too much effort to do something that maybe doesn't have as much value. So yeah, finding the right focus is important. Like what sort of things are actually impactful, and yeah, using the right definitions is important because there are a lot of artificial intelligences that are all kind of different. And the same kind of goes for sustainability. Like there are a lot of angles to there's the impact on the planet, but also in a lot of definitions of sustainability, we also look at social impact and
Yeah.
profit impact. It's going
Yep.
to be that perfect balance between people and profit. And what's the last one? The planet. Yeah. So people, profit, planet is the three P's that we often use.
Yeah.
Yeah.
As you're sort of talking about like the different models and a lot of that stuff, I can't help but think it's like, boy, there needs to be more affordances. Like right now, all of this is it just shows up in a select drop down of like equal weight. It's like you almost want that like, you know, the key to your helicopter should be like the keychain should have a giant coconut on it. You know what I mean? You're like, this is cumbersome. Like I'm not going to reach for this by default. But right now, like everything is just like showing up. It's all flat. And behind that are some like real decisions that
Yeah.
like you say, like steer things from, going up or nudging it downwards. And it's like that, those are design things. And like that, obviously, a lot of the design of the, the interfaces that people are using with it. It's like that stuff is fascinating to me. But yeah, I'm curious if like you've seen anything that's just like done a good job at like kind of injecting or kind of surfacing more of that kind of like impact to people in their daily rhythm, because it's hard to shit's hard enough to just conceptualize in our minds.
Yeah.
And then like we kind of like, again, under a bunch of pressure, hurry, use this, whatever. And so there's just like a lot of weird tensions that I think are tugging at people. And it's hard to be like, here's this thing that's an abstract concept. We're not good at thinking at that scale, at different time lengths. And it's like, there's got to be some like ways that we could just kind of like build that stuff into the fabric of using it.
Yeah,
I don't know.
it's a great idea, because a lot of what makes it so hard to reason about this is that like AI is presented as like this abstract concept, or like the drop down of like choose this model or that. But kind of behind that is like this huge physical infrastructure. Like I drove past one of the largest Dutch data centers the other day, and it's huge. Like you can drive past it for minutes. It's very big, and that kind of physicality of what we're actually doing. Yeah, it's very easy to hide that and not show it. Luckily, we have capitalism, because this costs a lot of money as well. So like the sustainability impact is often related to spend in terms of money. It costs a lot of money to run these systems because they're so big. And eventually, if people run out of VC money, things are going to get more expensive, and then we'll have our nudge that way, because it will just cost too much to do these things. I
Yeah.
haven't really seen great UIs that solve for this. Very few. Like some of them will have the word mini next to a model when you pick it, so you can see that one is smaller. But there is very little explanation of like, there are a couple of LLMs that will tell you the output or like CO2 emissions associated with your query. But that kind of thing is still really there. It's also really hard to measure, because a lot of the big AI companies don't want to
Sure.
say what the
Yeah.
energy usage is. They recently lobbied the European Commission successfully to get that data marked as business sensitive, so that they don't have to share it. And that has now become part of the European regulation. They don't want to share it, and that's a problem, because we need that information and like to have it in the right level of detail, so that we can actually build UIs that maybe describe that kind of thing too.
Yeah. Yeah. That's the hard rub, is that it's like same as it ever was. You have companies doing their best to try to obfuscate and skirt responsibility, and that does require us, our collective investment and holding feet to fire and doing what we can in our own lives. It's like the corollary to things like recycling feel apt in certain respects, right? And that was like the reduce, reuse, recycle stuff was all kind of
Yeah.
PepsiCo, kind of like, oh, we're just going to pass the buck onto here. And don't get me wrong, it's like, yeah, we absolutely should be reducing, reusing, and recycling. But it's like
Yeah.
at the end of the day, if they're able to like kind of continue to operate in these ways, it's our individual actions are going to be a drop in a bucket of a
Yeah.
bigger thing. And so I guess like are there organizations or places that you've seen doing good work at kind of like that kind of advocacy for sustainable AI development and things that like people can either like contribute to or like sign up for or
Mhm.
educate themselves on?
Yeah, there's a lot of different ones. Like around the web, I love the Green Web Foundation. They do a lot of great work around making the web more sustainable and also share a lot of research that they're doing. There's also the Green Software Foundation that are, I think, friendly with one another. They are more focused on software at large. And I believe they also have some stuff around AI. Uh, and there are a lot of like different organizations working on sharing data and then finding out
Yeah.
how can we start measuring what happens in data centers and make it more available so that people can make more informed decisions about this sort of thing. And that's very much needed. And yeah, great to see a lot of innovation in that area as well, because it's going to help people make better choices. And I think they're great because, like you say, it should be up to individuals to recycle. But if your individual choice is something you do on behalf of a huge corporation, you can suddenly make a huge impact with that. Because if large companies decide to use smaller models, it can reduce a lot,
Yep.
which is
Yep.
great.
Yep. Yeah. And I think it is important for people to understand that like wherever they're sitting in wherever you work, you are in a position of influence, right?
Yeah.
If you're like paying attention to this stuff, if you care about this stuff, it's like you're in some way, shape, or form in the driver's seat. Like usually we've been the same people that we have our family members saying the printer's broken or please fix my email or my Facebook login or whatever. It's like these are the same people that are kind of now going, okay, like here's AI. And I think that there is a, we have a responsibility to kind of steer people and like help guide things towards more like responsible choices. And that's
And we can't be
education,
like,
advocacy.
you're all bad people or whatever. We need to understand that these people are trying to do the right thing and actually give them tools to understand how they make better choices.
Yeah.
It's the same with accessibility and something that we're learning constantly. Like we cannot go, you're wrong, especially like if they're individuals. We need to give them the right tools to get it right. Sometimes that's a fine line. Like if people willfully ignore what they know and do a bad job where they should have done a right job, okay, we need to regulate that. And luckily we are for accessibility and sustainability. But yeah, giving people the right tools is usually the most productive way as well to kind of bring that change about. So we need better defaults, basically.
Yeah.
And I hope they're coming.
That corollary to accessibility is dead on. And that was always my frustration with accessibility in general, is that it's just like my read on it, and tell me if this is right or wrong. But like I've seen it get so much better over the years, which is great. But I think that there's this kind of very noble cause of accessibility. The web is built for everyone, irrespective of their ability, and we have an obligation, and that translates to a lot of passion to ensuring that happens. And then whenever people fall short, that passion comes out in the form of like, let me yell at you pretty good, and if I yell at you hard enough, then you're gonna get it right and care. And I always found that to be kind of counterproductive. And I feel like there, a lot of people, mutual friends and yourself included and stuff, I think have done a much better job at kind of like making it just feel more like this is something you want to be doing. We are all here. We're all, there's, progress, not perfection, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that kind of healthier attitude is welcome and needed.
It is really important to stay positive. But what makes it so hard is that it's a human right. We need equality. People have the right to have the same access. They're not getting it, and sometimes for the wrong reasons, because there's not enough investment or people aren't paid to do the thing properly. So I fully understand the frustration that practitioners have, whereas this should be accessible. You're paid a lot of money to do this project, and you forgot that important bit where it actually affects my friends or myself or, people in general, because they have the right to get equal access. But yeah, getting there is usually the path is usually positivity. We have to stay positive, even if we don't like it. And there are many times where I don't like it, where I'm like, well, you are awarded this amount of money to execute this project. You cannot go, I forgot, sorry. I didn't do the accessibility. You need to do it. But yeah, we need to, as an industry, make that a positive thing, because it's the only way to make it happen, I guess.
And frankly, what I've seen to be the most successful, I'm curious to get your take on it as well. There's something quite damning about checkboxes. I get very leery of checkboxes, and accessibility has always been one of those things where it's just yes, there are these heuristics. Yes, there are these very specific checkboxes that need to be checked. But unfortunately, that ends up translating into, here are these boxes that we need to hit, versus something that feels a lot healthier and just more positive, and is just kind of weaving it just throughout. It's just part of the language and part of the ongoing design and development process. It's just it's not a separate thing, and certainly not just a checkbox, but rather just something that we understand to be an inherent part of making digital things, that it's just a quality of it that we internalize and use. And the healthiest projects I've worked on are the ones that just have internalized that. And it feels more of a just an understood or a value that's lived, versus this just fucking chore.
Yeah, I get the point. I mean, I'm one of the editors of WCAG 3, so technically I am a checkbox producer.
You're the checkbox.
Sorry, I think.
But they need to be. But they need to exist.
Yeah, I think they need to exist. But on the other hand, it is not about. It shouldn't be about checking boxes. It should be an internalized thing. But it's really a bit of both. If your organization says we've internalized it and we've done a great job, I can use my checkboxes to see if it's true or not. I can double check it with that. But they are basically abstractions of actual accessibility. The people making the checkboxes, it's all based on research, and it's based on what are things that are helpful and stuff like that. But it becomes checkboxes because regulation needs to take it up, and there's reason. But it's really a bit of both. It's helpful to have checkboxes, but in the end, if you're in a team, that's probably not the only thing you need to do. Especially understanding how people use the web. I think that's the main. If you do accessibility, it's you need to understand not everyone uses a mouse. Some people use a keyboard. If you have that basic understanding, then the checkboxes will come because you will meet them. But yeah, it's more about how people use the web. That's also how the W3 is about it, by the way. They have a page that explains that. And I've always found that one of their most useful pages where it just explains this is how people use the web in general. These are some different ways. And if you know about those, it's harder to make things inaccessible. Because,
that's right.
You need to account for
it. Don't get me wrong. The checkboxes are very necessary. It's the it's the stopping there, and I think that you just did a beautiful job at like kind of there's the framing, there's the storytelling, and then ultimately like the kind of more just cultural transmission and
Yeah.
fostering empathy and just like a greater awareness that you're able to just kind of bring to your work that ends up making, surprise surprise, making the work a lot stronger. And I think that's it's, you operate from just like a healthier and more proactive place rather than this like whole like, oh shit, we just made like a big mess and then like we got to go in and fix the checkboxes after the fact. Yeah.
Yeah, I do
Yeah.
like accessibility audits every now and then I'll have the checkboxes when I'll write down failures, and it's like this fails, that's a failure. It's a negative activity in a way, and ideally you would just take an organization along and be like, this is how to do it, make it positive. Like even in like the process of auditing, there's a lot of improvements that people can make to making that not about checkboxes or failures, but making it about here's a code example, dump this in here because of this reason. This is going to make the keyboard accessible. It wasn't because of that attribute missing or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah, there can also be a big step in like positivity and making things actionable too.
I'm curious to get your take. So it's like we're through one lens of how AI is impacting user experience, which is okay, we're creating this stuff, we're producing code, and we could, point these things at our code to say, is this accessible, or like what are some things that we can be doing to improve this stuff, and that's one lens of it. And then the user experience comes out in the form of a thing that people interact with, and we guide people through flows and stuff like that. But one of the interesting things that's, I feel like, hasn't gotten as much sunlight is that, oh, well, the users of our websites and apps and all of that stuff also have these tools, and that changes the game, especially, I think, through the lens of accessibility. But I'll paint a picture here. I'm curious to get your thoughts on it, because in 2 hours or something, I created a Chrome extension that's basically like a supercharged version of like user style sheets from back in the day, right? So it's like, oh yeah, like anytime I'm visiting, Amazon.com, like I just want to hide literally every part of the web page that isn't just the product image and the how much the thing costs and the basic description of it, and stores that to local storage, and there it is. And then anytime I go to that web page, I don't see any of the cruft. If I go to another web page, another domain, I could change it to neon green, and if that's my desire, or bump up the font size. And what I'm very fascinated about is this new generation of accessibility for people that tend to get the short end of the stick in general, because people like us aren't considering them as well, but also tend to get like flattened into buckets, right? Which is like, oh, you're a wheelchair user, you're blind person, and it's like, obviously all of these things are spectrums, and people's specific disabilities or operating capacity, or whatever, short-term, long-term, everything in between, is so hyper personalized. So I'm curious, like, what your thoughts are on that, or like what's been going on there with respect to like, how does AI unlock maybe a different type of accessibility for people, or hopefully a better user experience for people across the board?
Yeah, in general, I believe browsers could do a lot more to fix accessibility on the browser level. Like, we've been adding focus cells to websites for years, but a browser could just draw a focus ring on whatever has focus on behalf of the user, right? If they want to have focus, that should be something that's one of the checkboxes in WCAG that we could throw away if browsers had that functionality. I had we had a small group at W3C that worked on this for a little bit, and we stopped doing the work for various reasons. But there is a list that we can make of things that browsers could allow for. also like killing elements, like you were saying on Amazon. Just like, I don't want that element, just I don't want to see it, or I want it to be bigger or smaller. There are things like without AI even that browsers could do on behalf of the user.
Yeah.
I think they should be doing it because they are user agents. They should be agents for the user, and do on behalf of the user, do whatever the web designer didn't want. Like the
Yeah.
web designer wanted cute fonts or like some light colors on light colors. The user might not want it, and the agent can do that for them.
Yeah.
So, bring the user back into the user agent. When it
Yeah.
comes to AI, I think there's a lot more customization that can happen. I've been thinking about this in terms of alternative text, for instance. We all do our best to write down an alternative for an image, the way that we intended the thing. But what I often find when I talk to blind friends is that they may be interested in very specific things in the image that I didn't think of. Like if you're shopping for a dress, and I'm giving this example because I heard Leonie Watson talk about this a few weeks ago at a conference. She was saying, I'm shopping for a dress. I want that dress to be black, so I want to check that it's black. And then a couple of other things that I don't remember. But there were some specifics that she wanted to know about, and she could ask her AI if they were in that image, and it was great. And the original author of that webpage could have never written down those details specifically, because maybe the next person will want different things about the dress or find different things important about it. So I think that sort of like personalized alternative text is just one example where some system that can describe what's on an image is really helpful, and can be customized in a way that would be impossible for any human to write down, because it depends so much on the use case. Maybe you don't want to know about the color of the dress, you want to know about the material, or you want to know if it's suitable for evening or whatever people want to know about dresses. I never buy dresses, I don't know. I always pick the wrong ones for my daughters.
But you're onto something there, because it's like there is fashion, and there is a whole language around fashion and dresses. I don't know dresses very much either, but I will say my first job whenever I moved to New York City was working for a fashion e-commerce company, and we would sell these multi-$1,000 dresses, like boutique dresses, like designer things, and it was fascinating, because it's like, who's going to spend $5,000 on a dress? Turns out people spend $5,000 on a dress on the, but there is so much like specific language that goes into a garment, and that is very, very difficult to like distill into like a single and static thing. And I do think that this new technology does unlock the ability for these experiences to be a lot less inert than they have been to date. That for me is particularly exciting. And that's all, of course, that the raw ingredients, the default, the standards, all of that, those check boxes, all of that stuff like kind of needs to be there. And then there's this like layer in front of it that just like can supercharge that accessibility and actually like take it from like a, yes, you can survive this experience, to like, oh, this is freaking lovely. And this is like tuned for me. My cousin's quadriplegic and has like the nature of her accident. She has like kind of difficulty with one of her hands. Like she can use it, but it's like the proximity of, say, like the primary call to action button, which there is no standard for, is hard to come by. So it's like that, just to even think about, whether that's additional browser settings or whatever that says is like, I want the primary call to action button for these types of pages if I'm shopping or sort of something like that to show up in a place that is comfortable for me, that is more reachable for me, or so like that stuff is super cool. Like I think that just feels like, oh wow, that is like could make a real material difference in a lot of humans' lives.
Just going to make sure people can do the thing they want to do. And this is also part of voice control interface on the Mac. You can have like a grid overlaid and say like, it will put numbers at all the elements, and you can just say, I want to press element 15 when number 15 appears, like that sort of thing. It's great. Like, yeah, it also makes people less dependent on how an individual UI is designed.
Yep.
Like, I think
Yeah.
it's great that people design websites, and all the respect to the people that are doing that work, like us. But also, they are lower priority than the users who just maybe want to do their thing or make it bigger or smaller or whatever. So it's gonna give people more agency, and I think that's great. Yeah.
Yeah. And again, it's the complicated stuff around this is like you can kind of like see all of this promise and potential and very real improvements in people's lives. And then there's also that balancing act with the our responsibility to make sure that it's not just we're just YOLOing it us all into Armageddon.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Like from an ethical point of view, I think like if you're weighing these different values, it's like if someone needs this as an assistive technology, that's a different thing than someone wants it because they just want to see what it looks like if you put an elephant's head on a tiger or whatever and make an image generating based on that. That's a real like tangential difference to difference.
Yeah. And it's like, I think kind of bringing it all home to just like people's, but we are able to make decisions, and so it's like kind of making the right decisions of like it's like kind of using for something that could be just like a simple search or a query or a little sort of script or writing 2 lines of code or whatever it might be. It's like maybe error on that side and not just kind of throw the helicopters at it by default.
Yeah.
I think that's like really kind of pragmatic stuff that we could be doing, and to employ this technology to sort of help, I think kind of advance the promise of the web. I maybe that's like a good kind of thing to point it at is like okay, like yeah, if we're talking about pointing this thing at something, let's point it in the direction of betterment. And we've done you and your colleagues and everything have done like a really great job at defining what that betterment is and what those standards are and like what we're all sort of like striving for. And I think that feels like a good thing, a relatively good application of this technology is like, hey, how can we just make sure whatever we're producing with or without LLMs is going out the door and is, sturdy and resilient and going to last a long time and is accessible for anyone who's accessing it. The only last question, we started our conversation talking about music. What is some music that you want more people to know about?
Yeah, this is such a hard question because there's so much great music out there. Something that I've enjoyed recently, and this is Dutch, so it will be really hard for anyone listening who doesn't understand Dutch, is a group called Iceland. They are named after the country, but it is a metaphor for the Netherlands being a country that's too cold towards, for instance, immigrants, making immigration too much of a problem and like closing borders. So they call the country Iceland, and they make all sorts of somewhat silly music, but also quite serious about, what is AI doing to why capitalism is bad. They call capitalism the C word. So, yeah, lots of fun in that music. It's kind of like punk hip hop. I've enjoyed that. And if I can name 2, I also really like James Blake's latest album called Trying Times, which is about like disappearance of love and like lots of good themes. But also, I think he's technically like a great musician, doing magic with instruments that I don't understand. You probably do, because you're a musician too. I don't know what he's doing with his synthesizers, but I think it sounds good.
He is doing a lot of crazy stuff right out of the gate, but I think that the thing that impresses me most about him is he is able to really convey a mood better than nearly anyone else that I've ever heard. It's like, oh my God, you feel something listening to that. But I'm sure Iceland makes you feel something as well. And I will give that a listen. That sounds like some good social commentary and a good kind of bookend for our conversation and our responsibility as well. So that's great. Fantastic. The last thing is, where could people follow along with you and your work, and where are you hanging out?
Easiest is probably Hidde.blog, which is my website. I also am on various platforms with HDV, because my first and last name are a bit tricky to pronounce, so I just stick with the initials. HDV is where I'm at most of the time.
Beautiful. Well, thanks so much for taking the time to chat, and go enjoy the rest of your evening over there, I suppose, right?
Yeah. Have a great rest of your day, Brad.
All right. Take care, man. See ya.